Welcome. My name is Dr. Kara Van Dam, and I'm Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at University of Maryland Global Campus. And it brings me great pleasure to join you once again for an installment of our Navigating the Future webinar series. Today, we're turning our attention to academic integrity, how COVID-19 and the push to online learning is an opportunity to move ever more towards authentic and formative assessment. So the rapid move this spring to online learning raised fears at many institutions that they were about to face an onslaught of cheating. Today, we are speaking to Dr. Jen Simons, UMGC's Assistant Vice President for Academic Integrity and Accountability, who will help us bust some of the myths about online learning and academic integrity and discuss the opportunities she sees as online learning expands further. Dr. Simons holds a PhD in psychology, as well as master's degrees in both psychology and counseling. Welcome to the conversation, Jen. Let's dig in.
Thanks,
So,
Kara.
absolutely. When schools rushed to move learning online this spring, the tone was really one of panic. How will we stop cheating? How can we set up a proctoring service? Were they panicking about the right things?
It was an interesting time for sure because it was an unusual set of circumstances. So we had face-to-face institutions who suddenly needed to move their learning in an online format. And there are a couple of myths there that you mentioned. We're going to bust some of those. So one of the myths is that cheating happens much more in online learning environments than it does in face-to-face. But research actually does not bear this out. There's a little bit of difference by certain categories, but for the most part, cheating happens in face-to-face and cheating happens in online environments. The other myth is that what was happening in spring for this shift for face-to-face institutions to suddenly go online is that people were calling this online learning. And those of us experienced with online learning know, no, that was emergency remote learning. That was not a intentionally designed online learning environment or online learning curricula. So it was not a good simulation of what true, well-designed online learning is.
Excellent. So, of course, we know that cheating does happen, right? But I think that one of the things that I like about your approach is you really focus on the why of cheating. And there was a great documentary several years ago that was called Dishonesty. And it showed through psychological experiments that given the right set of circumstances, really any one of us could end up being a cheater. So, can you explain the psychology of this to us a bit better?
Yeah, I'll go through some of the reasons why people cheat. And like you said, that I highly recommend this dishonesty documentary to understand the situations in which just about anyone would cheat or take a shortcut. And so the one that comes to mind most in this, what was really driving the panic in spring, is temptation and opportunity, which most people think that's the only reason that students cheat because they can. And that online, if they're not proctored in an exam, they're going to cheat. That, yeah, temptation and opportunity is among what drives students to take some shortcuts. But there are other ones to really explore further. And one of them is stress and pressure and the focus on extrinsic rewards. And that's particularly true with populations of adult learners, with first generation college students, with students who are from underrepresented and historically excluded backgrounds in higher education, because there's all kinds of societal pressure on what that kind of learning should look like and who is supposed to be doing that learning. So that creates a great deal of stress and pressure. The focus on performance over mastery is another condition. Negative perceptions of courses, and this can be courses that are disorganized, where faculty are disengaged and appear not to care about students or their learning, and perception that work is what some might call fluff or busy work, and especially perceptions that the information is not relevant, particularly in the case of students taking general education courses that are not in the major that is the reason why they are in college or university.
Thank you. So, what I'm hearing you say really is that if we want to ensure academic integrity, it really starts with putting students in a good situation. And in this case, really thinking about good course design. So, what are some attributes of good online course design versus this sort of panic remote learning?
Yeah, I have this kind of vision of, and I call it kind of engaged flow without roadblocks. And I will say I bought a non-Roomba brand electric vacuum. And this Roomba does what students do when they get roadblocks, that rather than going around a corner, it went completely across the other room when it hit a block. And so when students hit a block in a course, some will navigate around that and go around the corner. Some will go across the room like my Roomba and take these shortcuts that are going to lead them into some really situations that are regrettable. So a big one in online design is backwards design. And this is leading the course and designing the whole course around learning objectives and starting with those learning objectives and planning the course. And the difference of that is a more traditional, take a textbook, go chapter by chapter and design traditional assignments, because we're going through each chapter of the book and we're going to cover the content. And intentional design with learning objective comes across as reasons why each of the course modules are placed the way they are, for instance. Another important thing is that it's designed for the setting. And so the emergency remote learning, one of the big panics, and it's continued in face-to-face institutions, adjusting from closed book exams. And for online learning, it doesn't make sense to have closed book exams in this artificial kind of environment. And so having open book, open notes, open internet, being realistic for the setting rather than creating something that's artificial. Also universal design for learning to make the courses as accessible as possible. And that's another smooth flow through the course, so there's no hindrances for students. Applied learning and authentic assessment. So this is really a focus of applying students' experience as part of content learning to bring in their own experience. So this does a lot of things. It ups the integrity because students are motivated and engaged to discuss their own experiences, to learn the content. And then of course, on the end, we really focus on promoting integrity. And so having students be in the position to never go looking for shortcuts. And so those authentic and applied assignments really get you there. And then that does have the benefit on the other side of really plagiarism proofing, to make it very difficult for somebody to find something online or buy something that's going to match the assignment. It's important to make clear why the learning's relevant and why students are taking the course, and especially general education courses where it's non-majors. And it's important to make a case for how this is relevant, even if this is not your major, and even if this is the only course you're ever going to take in this subject. Avoiding graded group work product is a very specific one, but I think it's an important one because there are a number of issues that happen in group work, especially when one product that's created by all group members is going to be graded. So that ups the stress and pressure for students. It ups the imposterism. And when there's uneven input into a group, having that one grade can really lead students to want to take some shortcuts because of the group grade. So there's a lot of bigger issues in that one very specific kind of assignment. And I think something else that's really important is making the learning design very transparent to students, and to use the words, this is designed for your learning. And so there's a traditional perception that teachers are teaching when they are talking to students, when they are lecturing, or when they are there telling students information. And we know from all kinds of learning science research that students learn in many different ways, and that a lecture is one form of ways for students to learn, but there are many more. So a kind of sample comment a student might say is, you just told me to watch a YouTube video. You're not teaching me. So it's important to have the intentionality to say, we reviewed many different possible videos. We thought this was the one that provides a really excellent summary of this content. And here's what you'll get out of this video, not just if it's just the video, the instructor may know, yeah, I curated this because I did a lot of work, but the student doesn't know that on the other end. So making that learning design really explicit.
I think that's great. And there's so many things that you just covered that I think are so powerful. I mean, one is this just real notion that as educators, I think part of our job is to help students understand that what we're giving them are tools for their toolkit, right? That every class is about, here's another tool in your toolkit. And I want to go back to your point about open book, right? And this notion that we have to do proctoring because we can't do open book. And I know that when I was a graduate student, all of our exams, they were take home and they were open book because, and that was intentional, it was our professors saying that the goal is not to memorize all of this stuff and have it all in your brain, it's to know where to find it and then know how to do higher level analysis with it and synthesis and the like. And I think that even though those are sort of upper level blooms, that it's never too early to start getting people to apply what they're learning, particularly with adult students. And so I really like that notion that you brought in about tapping into knowledge, bringing in personal experience and professional experience. So it is applied learning, as well as really that toolkit approach. So I think that's really, all of those things are important. And yes, every group project I've ever been in, there's been somebody that we had to sort of corral because it went down a bit of a plagiarism path. So, one thing that I have been trying to do with this series is really take what is obviously sort of a horrific time that we're all living through. A lot of people are dying. Very sadly, even more are going to die, more are going to get sick. We have some great news on the vaccine front. However, we're in for a long, couple, 3 months here, really longer, actually, much longer than that. Nevertheless, one of my goals in this webinar series is to try to look for those silver linings and look for those things that we can be thankful for that COVID-19 and living through a pandemic has helped us think about differently. So to end on hopefully an optimistic note, what are some of the things that you're thankful for as you have come through this and some new things that have emerged?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm really thankful for these pedagogy discussions that we're having. So a group popped up on Facebook immediately called Pandemic Pedagogy. There's a lot of idea exchange. I was already part of one in my own field of psychology. It's a really robust Facebook group from the Society of Teaching Psychology, where there's always been idea sharing and the support that those of us who are experienced in online learning were providing to people who are new at it and just scared and desperate and and stressed, and it was a really rough time initially, especially. And then I think there's some exciting opportunities coming out of this, because any course designed with backwards design, for instance, you apply these learning principles to any course and the course will improve in student engagement and motivation. And so these are especially important at backwards design, especially really essential in online learning, because you need to map out the entire course initially. But applied to face to face, it's also a very powerful tool as well. And I'm also hearing from faculty who were initially resistant, so from face to face institutions, saying, oh, wow, I'm really connecting with my students in this way. And that's connecting with students is really powerful for promoting integrity and understanding that you don't have to be in the same room smiling at the student to be able to connect with them. And so I think having those built-in ways for relationships is an exciting piece of people understanding the opportunity. There are a lot of assumptions people make about online learning before they have experienced it. And so there's a whole bunch of people getting to see what it's really about and getting to see that it's not, there's a lot of myths out there about, you just read a book and take a quiz on the computer. And like, that was true of the distance learning I did as a post-baccalaureate student in 1991, but that's not true in 2020. We know so much. And so what's exciting, I think, is for educators, both instructional designers and faculty who design their own courses, program directors, anybody involved in design who's from a traditional setting, is to explore these. And now I wouldn't be surprised if once things go back to face to face, they're going to have these in their toolkit. If for no other reason, if they have to cancel class, oh, I actually know a way that I can have students do this. And some might, I do think some people will use these kinds of tools in the future. Some will be very happy to get back to face and never visit the online environment again. But I am hearing from a number of people that they're excited about these new opportunities.
I think that's great. Well, Dr. Simons, this was a great conversation. I knew it would be really interesting and really rich. And I agree with you. I think that this is maybe silver lining, the push we needed to really embrace more of these tools and technologies to do better technology enabled education. So that's it for this particular webinar episode, but I want to just give a plug for our next webinar. You know, one of the things that we've seen in this pandemic is there's actually been a lot of ageism, where there have been people making statements such as, well, it's only really the elderly who get sick, and the elderly, and particularly those in assisted living, have really borne the brunt of some of the worst of this pandemic. So in our next webinar, we're actually going to be joined by Catherine Im, who is the Program Director for Gerontology and Behavioral Sciences. And she's going to talk about the ageism that we've seen through the COVID pandemic, as well as really making the case for anti-ageism reform based on it. So I hope you'll tune in for that as well. Everybody, please stay safe, stay well. Happy Thanksgiving. Go small. All right. Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care,
you.
Jen.